Welcome to Lecture 9. Today, we will be discussing meaningful gestures. Meaningful gestures. As we get into this section, I have a side quest I want you to work on. I want you to do two things. Think back upon past presentations you've seen from a pastor, a teacher, a parent, whoever it may be, and then watch out at the presentations that you will see throughout the course of the next 7 days. And over the next 7 days, by both reflecting on presentations you have seen and studying presentations you will see, I want you to specifically watch for that presenter's gestures. Each person will have a little bit of a different gesture dictionary. They'll have different gestures that they make. Your pastor will have different gestures than I make. And that doesn't mean that one of us is right or wrong. It means that, hey, we have different gestures that we've added to our repertoire. Now, what I want you to do over the course of these next 7 days is to study the gestures that you see. And then I want you to you should take about a quarter of the gestures you see, about 25%. Study them thoroughly. Study what did that gesture mean? What did it communicate? And add 25% of the gestures you see into your gesture dictionary, into your repertoire. And I don't mean a written dictionary. Now you can find written dictionaries of gestures. There's some great ones online. If you want to look up, okay, what does this specific gesture generally convey? Or what's a gesture that conveys this meaning or this thought? There's some great resources for you out there. But more so, I want this to be a mental dictionary for you. Okay, this is a me gesture. Add to that. If you're unwilling to add to your gesture repertoire, you'll find yourself severely limited. And so, be willing to take what someone else has done, study its strengths, and add it to what you would call your own. Okay, that's your side quest for this week. Now, as we get into the lecture notes, gestures must always be specific. Under number 3 here, letter A, gestures must always be specific. We can enumerate, divide, compare, locate, contrast, all with the movement of our hands. How would we do each of those? How would you enumerate? Okay, to enumerate means to count. Now generally you would do this by using your fingers. Okay, there were 4 guys standing on the side of the road. Okay, you can use your fingers for that quite easily. How would you divide? Dividing is pretty fun. If you're trying to separate something, you can kind of expand them in a division, or you can separate them fully. To divide, a really great way to do it is to put your hands together. With your hands together, you can chop into something, okay? Now again, with a single hand, you can still chop, and you can divide with one hand. We'll talk about that in a moment. But a great way to show a clear separation is to chop into something with 2 hands. And we'll talk about this again a little bit more in a minute. But when you're using a palm, you want to angle it downward, because a palm angled downward, open hand angled downward is going to be more precise than an open hand just at the level. So if you take your hands, put them together in the middle, and then you divide into something, okay, so now I'm into a topic, into a subject, into a piece of cake, whatever it is, okay, I'm in it, my fingers are in it. Now from here to divide, you can take your hands, and by turning the palms toward your body and out one at a time, you can show a division. Okay, these are separate. These are not alike to each other. Again, you dive into it and you show the separation. Now with your hands, the back of your hand will repulse the back of your other hand. It's like magnets when you have 2 south poles oriented toward each other. The back of your hand shows away from. It's a negative sensation with the back of your hand. So if you have 2 backs, it's showing a strong division. Now, if on the other hand, I were to dive into a topic, and instead of turning my hands away to show the back of the hand toward the topic, if I were to dive into it and I were to leave my palms inward, now I'm not necessarily dividing it, I'm more opening it up. I'm examining it further. I'm kind of zooming in on the camera by doing this. So again, if you want to do that, hey, let's dive deeper into this topic. Okay, well now we've dove deeper in. I've taken something that was small, that was precise, again with the downward fingers, and I've made it larger. I've made it easier for the audience to jump in with me and study it. Okay, so that's the difference between a division and an examination or an opening. Now you can also divide just with a single chop, and yeah, kind of think of it as a karate chop there, where you're bringing it down to show separation, okay? This can be done if you're trying to separate away from something. You can give that division and then step as you do it. We must be separate from the world, okay? Now I'm showing, okay, there's a line here, there's a division, and I'm stepping away from that division to show my separation. Okay? And again, you can do separate and then turn the hand away as you step away. If you want to show strong separation, that would be great. You can divide with a vertical palm. Okay, what did we have here? Enumerate, divide. We're just going to go through a few of these here. Compare. How would you compare something? How would you compare something? And I want you to think of this in your mind. How would I do this? Well, normally when we're giving a comparison, it's normally a kind of weighing. This or that. This or that. And you don't have to tip your hands back and forth, but commonly you will to some extent to show, hey, we're comparing these two. Now your hand can hold anything that you want to hold. Okay? Your open palm can hold anything you want to hold. This is important to get. Now I can say, and I opened the door and there was nothing there. What's in my hand? Nothing. I looked out the window and there was a tank. What's in my hands? A tank. You can literally put anything in your hand. And I had this thought. Well, what did I just do? I pulled the thought out of my mind and I put it in the palm of my hand so that the audience can see it. It's there in my palm. You can put anything you want. Soteriology and pneumatology are separate. Okay? Well, I've just put two different areas of theology in the palm of my hand. Again, utilize the palm of your hand. You can put anything here. So don't waste the palm. The palm is powerful. So to contrast, you're going to put two things in the palm of your hand, and you're generally going to kind of weigh them or present them to your audience. To locate, how do you locate? Well, sometimes you think of locating just as pointing, right? Give that finger, point, okay? For me, there's the door. That's the exit. Now, what we want to be careful with is in locating something, a finger is seen largely as accusatory. It has a negative connotation, right? If I say, hey, I want you to join me for a meeting later today. Right? Okay, well, the rest of the people in the class are going to be like, oh, shoot, what'd he do? What if, on the other hand, I say, hey, would you stop by my office later today? Well, I'm indicating who I'm talking to, but it's a lot more welcoming. This can be the same with just telling someone where the door is. The nearest exit is over to your right. All right, now, I'm pointing, I'm indicating a direction, but it's very welcoming. An open hand is welcoming. If I want to be very specific, it was right there. Again, I can use that palm, use that open hand, but by angling my finger downward, I can show precisely where something was. My notes are here on the table. Okay? Here's another small note. When you're gesturing, you don't want to cross your body as much as possible. Now in that instance, I gestured in front of myself so that you could see the hand and I wouldn't be right against the notes. If I had more room, I would have stepped away and I would have shown it here with the left hand, which I could have done and maybe would have been better there. But as a general rule, you don't want to cross in front of your body to gesture. Because if you're crossing your hands in front of your body, you're closing yourself off to your audience. You want to remain open to your audience. So try to use the hand that's in the direction of what you're indicating, again, unless the thing is very close. And in that instance, it would be less awkward to maybe move in front of my chest than to just give a very small gesture to the side of my body. Okay, so to indicate direction, I would suggest you use a vertical palm or an open hand. And contrast, similar to comparing with the movement of our hand. There's so much power that can simply be accomplished just by the power of the hand. So much that can be accomplished. Letter B, gestures should be purposeful and decisive. Purposeful and decisive. Weak gestures indicate a lack of confidence. Weak gestures indicate a lack of confidence. Now, what are some examples of strong and weak gestures? What are the categories that we could put these in? Well, we have 3 categories for you to examine. The first is a 1/3 gesture, okay? A 1/3 gesture. And we have 1/3, 2/3, and then 3/3, or full is how it's listed in the notes. A full gesture is a third one. Now, what's a 1/3 gesture? This is a gesture that begins at the wrist, and it is always weak and indecisive. You'll never have a strong gesture that starts at the wrist. Now, this could be if you have your hands in front of you. This isn't the most common, but if I had my hands in front of me and I was like, and you need to get this point. Okay, this is a very weak gesture. I'm just gesturing from the wrist. More commonly, you'll see this gesture come when someone's hands are down by their side. Now, their hands are down by their side, and their teacher told them they need to have gestures, or their friend told them they need to have gestures. And so they're going to add gestures to their presentation, and all they add is gestures right down here. Then the Lord said unto me, Come, all ye that are weary and heavy laden, and ye shall find rest. Now, these are just coming from my wrists. I look like a penguin, okay? Let's be honest. These are very weak, very indecisive. Your audience won't like them. So make sure that you're always avoiding 1/3 gestures, gestures that simply come from the wrist. Next, you have 2/3 gestures. 2/3 gestures. Now, these are gestures that come from the elbow. They come from the elbow, and they are sometimes acceptable. What do I mean by this? Okay, well, there are times when maybe you have a smaller audience or a smaller, if you're on a screen, like you're going to be doing your recordings, you might not have as much wingspan that you can work with. Now, I have this camera set up so that it's in landscape mode. I can reach out fairly well. If I step to the back, I can reach out as far as I want, and it's not going to go off screen. Now, if you had this in portrait mode, up and down, I would have very little room to work with. And the closer I get to the camera, the less room I have to work with, right? If I extend my arms out, they're going to go off the camera. And so for that purpose, I have to sometimes include a 2/3 gesture, which is one that comes primarily from the elbow. However, this shouldn't be the norm for you. The norm should be a gesture that comes from the shoulder. A gesture that comes from the shoulder. In these gestures, you're allowing the elbow to come away from your body. As the elbow comes away from the body, you open yourself up to the audience. You become more trustworthy. And you're having bigger gestures that can communicate more decisively. So the majority of your gestures should be what we call full gestures. Gestures that originate from the shoulder. Originate from the shoulder. Let me make sure I got all the blanks. Originate from the shoulder and is the most decisive and powerful. The most decisive and powerful. So again, what are the three kind of categories of gesture strength? You have a 1/3 gesture that starts from the wrist. Wherever that may be, the gesture simply comes from the wrist. And that's never acceptable, always weak. You have a 2/3 gesture that starts from the elbow. And these are sometimes acceptable. And then you have the 3/3 or the full gesture that originates from the shoulder. And these are your most powerful and decisive gestures. Now, letter C. Gestures should be varied. They should be varied. Be careful of repeating the same gesture for every point of emphasis. This is easier to do than you would think. Again, I mentioned this sometimes in a video announcement for a church. You'll have someone who's a great guy in the church or a great lady in the church who's asked to do a video presentation, and they get up there, and for every point, they have the same gesture that they make. No matter what they're emphasizing, it's the same gesture. Welcome to Lancaster Baptist Church. We're glad you're here today. If you would fill out the Connect form that's in front of you, there in your seat, we have a gift that we would like to give to you. So please, stop by the guest tables after the service to turn in your Connect card and receive a gift from us. Welcome to Lancaster Baptist. What's the problem? Why the same gesture every time? And you know what your audience is going to tell? your audience is going to be like, oh my goodness, add something else in there. It's distracting. It's taken away from the message. When you're presenting, why do we need to work at building our gesture dictionary, our gesture repertoire? Because as you build that dictionary out, you'll be able to have more and more varied gestures and more specific gestures. And you want to be as specific as possible, as decisive as possible, and as able, you want to be strongly buried in your gestures. Don't become repetitive. Letter E, I believe. Nope, letter D. Gestures should be natural. They should be natural. Don't force them. Let them flow from the burden you have to communicate. Now, one of my friends, during a sermon that he was preaching, I was going to watch his sermon during a preaching competition when I was in college. And during his sermon, he was preaching away, and he got to a certain point in the notes where he was preaching, and then he looked down, he looked up at us, he walked over to the pulpit, he slammed the pulpit, stomped his foot, and continued with the presentation, continued with the sermon. Now, what was written in the notes? Tap pulpit, stomp foot, probably. It was something that he wanted to add, and it was in his notes to add this gesture, but he had to pause his entire sermon because he was some 10 feet away from the pulpit, and he had to pause the entire sermon, walk over to the pulpit in order to make his stomp and knock on the pulpit to continue his presentation. Now, it's good to practice your gestures. You should practice your gestures. But if you're practicing your gestures and you find that, wow, this gesture isn't flowing, or if you're in your presentation and you have a gesture that you've practiced, that you've worked on, and it doesn't flow correctly, don't do it. Just move along with your presentation. Gestures must be natural. Now, in our next lecture, we'll continue by looking at more specific gestures. What does the fist indicate? What does an open palm indicate? What does a finger indicate? We'll look at that in Lecture 10.